Welcome back to episode number 11 of the Beginner to Master Speedrun. I'm coming into today rated 870, so hopefully I can break 900. And let's hop into the first game. Playing a series of numbers followed by ABC. Okay, we have a King's Pawn opening. Opponent rated 962. And I'm going to stick with most principal chess. Defend the pawn, control the center. And there's a lot of moves white can play here. There's d4, there's Italian, there's a Spanish. There's potentially the 3 knights or 4 knights. Here we have the Scotch, which is also very playable. And from this position, there are a few moves for black. I've noticed a lot of beginners like to just trade, which is not actually a good option, even though it would prompt the queen to come out early. It would basically surrender the center, and white would be very happy to go into that. So the move I like to play here is bishop to c5. Very simply, developing, attacking the knight. The alternative would have been knight to f6. But yeah, this is a playable line. White takes on c6. And in this position, there is a somewhat surprising move because I could take the knight, but as far as I know, the theoretical approach is actually to play queen f6. And obviously I am threatening mate in 1. But the point of this move is there's cases where I want to take back with the d-pawn and not allow the queens to get traded. And there's no way for white to save the knight and the pawn in a single move here. Like knight d4, I can take it. So pretty sure there's been like a number of Grandmaster games that have featured this position. And unfortunately for my opponent, yeah, we have a somewhat reverse version of Scholar's Mate. I feel a little bit bad. It reminds me of that game, what was it? Moist Critical against XQC. Very similar line.
No, please don't. It's too soon. It's too soon, Hikaru.
I think that game featured like this and then this and then this and then this and then checkmate. Might have to search the clip on YouTube.
We didn't even reach a climax.
But yeah, from the white perspective, my opponent, okay, after bishop c5, my opponent should be aware of the threat, except the fact that the knight will not be saved. I think there's a few options for white, like queen to f3 is a main line, queen d2 or queen e2 also playable, but it was necessary to defend f2. So that was a quick one, 6-move game to start the video. Let's move on, another 10-minute game. Playing BMT2. It seemed like my opponent pre-moved knight c6, which is known as a Nimzowitsch defense. Against this, I mean, the most principal move is d4. I could also play knight f3 and maybe try and transpose back into an e4 opening or e4, e5 opening. Let's play d4. I'll stick with principal chess. And the opponent very quickly plays d5. And this is a playable move. This is aiming to maybe go into a Scandinavian type opening. If I take, then the queen would take, and then the pawn is hit. So I've had this position before, and I'm going to play a move that I very much like for white, is just to defend the pawn with knight c3. And this is a move that a lot of players maybe aren't used to encountering who play this defense as black. And one of the points is I don't have to take back on e4 right away. I'm actually very happy to play pawn d5, attacking the knight and getting ready to take. Although I probably don't want to take right away because then that would give black the chance to take on d5, and then I would be down a pawn. So with the knight coming to b4, It is attacking the pawn, but my pawn is defended enough times here. So I think I'm happy to play a3, simply kicking the knight. If takes, I'll win the knight. And if knight a6, then I can recapture, and then, yeah, the d5 pawn is defended. Everything should be good. So I'm pretty sure instead of knight b4, my opponent should have played knight e5 to keep the knight more centralized. Knight a6 is probably the best move here, but as the old saying goes, knights on the rim are very grim. Or very dim. Dim? Grim? Kind of the same thing. Okay, so we see bishop f5, attacking my undefended knight. And here I do have some options. I'm somewhat tempted to throw in the check, because then black would have to play c6 or bishop d7. I mean, another very logical move is to play knight g3. And then if the bishop moves back, then bishop b5 could maybe be a lot more powerful, because then there's no bishop d7. Like bishop b5, bishop d7, I don't want to be just developing and then trading. So yeah, I like the fact of, even though I'm retreating the knight, I am keeping initiative. Opponent defends a bishop. So again, if I play bishop b5, black can block the check. But if I take the bishop first, black will likely take back, and then I check. And then there's only two legal moves for black. Imagine c6 is played. And then I take. Then it's actually not super simple, because black could take, and then queenside castle. I think it's still good for me. I'll win a pawn in that variation. That was a somewhat deep calculation, but let's go into this. I mean, this line is pretty forcing. Opponent's taking time. I have taken a decent amount of time to play this opening, but yeah, hopefully the calculations pay off. c6 played very quickly. And let's go into this. I'm curious if my opponent will find the best continuation. There's really not another great option for black, even here, because I'm threatening to take, unleashing the bishop and then queening. So my opponent does find queenside castling. And now I do have to be careful just with the d file. Like if I play bishop d2, there could be bishop h6, but then knight f3 defends. I think I would rather just play king e2. And normally, like, it's not great to quote-unquote bomb cloud the king like this, like putting the king on e2. But with queens off the board, it's kind of hard for black to exploit the king. And meanwhile, opponent just gave a free knight. And maybe it's this king that's a bit more exploitable, because I can develop with tempo. Check to the king. If king b6, then I could retreat. e5. e5 is sometimes a nice idea with the idea to pin the bishop, but if I take on e5, it's check, and it's a double attack. I'll be winning the rook on h8. Yeah, let's take this rook. Show no mercy. And if rook e8 check, then I can hide on f1. Life will be good. Okay, still have to watch out for what black wants to do. Rook is attacking the bishop. So let's drop it back to very nice central square. Attacking the pawn. Although I probably don't want to take the pawn because rook a8 would skewer the bishops. But there's no reason to do anything like too crazy here. It's important to just complete development, get the rooks into play. Just want to make sure black's not attacking anything. Like everything is pretty much defended. I'll play h3. I'll kick the knight. If knight d4, I probably don't mind trading. Or I should say knight e5. Although with knight e5, I could trade, but I could also pin the knight and then have 3 attackers against a pinned piece, which perhaps is a bit more attractive. Okay, so we see knight h6. And there's a lot of options here. I mean, I could take the free pawn, but I'm more inclined to just get rooks into play. If I can trade off black's rook, then it'll make life a bit easier in converting. Okay, now I'll take the pawn. Again, attacking the rook. And I'll try and win this game as efficiently as possible. Because already, like, the king might be running short on squares. And I'll set up a nice trap here. I'm going to centralize a knight. This does obstruct the bishop from defending the pawn. It does allow black to take on b2. But the point is then I have knight e6 check with a discovered attack against b2. And yeah, black falls into it. Oh no, my pawn, but oh no, black's rook. Now I am going to lose a bishop on a6, but that's another good trade for me. Now I'm up 2 rooks in this position. And in terms of the strategy to win, not only win, but win quickly, I think I'd like to go for some trades. Try and trade off the bishops. This is another case where I can say, oh no, my pawn. If black takes it, then the bishop will be lost. So the nice thing about being up material is I have a lot of pieces to generate tactics with. And this is just, downward spiraling for black. Opponent attacks the bishop. I'll take with check, not giving time for black to take the bishop. And now, again, I don't want to overthink things. I'm going to just play bishop f4, which keeps the knight very restricted. And let's save the rook. Might as well take the pawn. It's a free pawn. Attacking the knight. The knight is almost trapped. Like, I'm controlling all these squares. The only safe square for the knight is h8. Will my opponent find it? Knight h8 would allow knight g6 the next move. I mean, at this point, I'm more focused on forming some kind of checkmating net. And I think the best way to do that is to bring in the other rook. And I could start with rook to b1. But one thing to kind of think about here is what available squares does the king have? Currently, the king has 3 legal moves. I'm controlling the file, taking away c5. So I actually really like the idea of kind of boxing in the king even more. So now I'm controlling the squares on the c file and the squares on the a file. So rook b1 is actually checkmate here. It's one of the more efficient ways to win. There's some times where you have to watch out for like trapping the king too much and creating stalemates, but we were not close to stalemate given that the knight and the h-pawn could still move and the c-pawn. So I think that was a pretty clean game. Got a nice position from the opening. Opponent allowed me to expand and attack the knight. Sometimes expanding like this can be weakening because it's overextending, but in this case, pawn was well supported and it really paid off. Gave a nice position. And then this sequence, I do want to give kudos to my opponent for finding queenside castling, but in this position, I think it was the biggest blunder for my opponent instead of taking the pawn, black probably should have moved the knight, something like knight c7, to save the knight, attack the bishop. I would have taken, and white would be up a pawn here, but it would still be a bigger fight, given that, yeah, it's like almost equal material. Black has a bit more development as well. So, getting closer to 900. Let's go again. Playing some random goofy cat person. Okay. Curious what random goofy opening we'll have. The Scandinavian. Yeah, with Scandinavian, I like to very simply attack the queen right away. We see queen d8. I know a fellow international master, John Bartholomew, is a big proponent, not only of the Scandi, but of this specific line. It's not the most aggressive line, like black just spent 2 tempi moving the queen back and forth. But yeah, maybe it's playable. e5 comes very quickly. This is interesting. So black is sacrificing a pawn to then maybe trade queens, but I think I'm very happy just to win the pawn. And then the queen trade, I mean, should favor the side who's up material. And I don't have to take with the king here. I think I'd rather preserve casting rights, and I'll take with the knight. Even though it looks a little bit weird having the knight on the back rank. Yeah, I'd much rather be able to castle queenside or kingside in the near future. So black does attack the pawn. And I would like to somehow develop and defend the pawn. If I play knight f3, black could develop again, threaten to double the pawns, also threaten to take and win the pawn. So even though knight f3 is very natural, I think I like bishop f4 a bit more, because it's harder to exploit the bishop here. And it gets me one step closer to castling queenside. f5, interesting. I wonder if my opponent is hoping I take en passant so the knight can develop. But en passant isn't forced. And now it's a question, which minor piece do I want to develop? I mean, these moves come to mind. But if we think about what black wants to do, like what development scheme black is going for, I think it's likely black wants to play bishop e6 and castle queenside. So I have a developing move here to prevent black from playing bishop e6, which is bishop c4. And the downside of having played f5 is that the pawn's not supporting e6. So this diagonal is just much weaker. And we'll see how black continues here. Yeah, knight e7. I was going to say knight e7 is probably the best approach. Going for knight g6 to attack the bishop and the pawn. So it's not easy to stop knight g6. But I imagine there should be some ways to deal with it. Like for one, now I can develop. And then if knight g6 is played, the pawn will be defended. Now I can play a move like g3 just to reinforce the bishop. Let's go for this. I mean, sometimes playing a move like g3 is a bit ugly. Okay, in this case, it won't be necessary. But I was going to say that g3 would just keep everything defended. We see here black going for bishop g7, which I don't think I mind. Let's develop the knight. I'm bringing the knight to c3 because the prospect of knight b5 looks really nice. Like if I get in this move, then it's not easy for black to defend the c-pawn. Like the only way to defend the pawn would be king d8. And yeah, with bishop g7, like black's not threatening to take. Black's not even like ready to castle because this bishop is so strong. So let's go on the offensive. My opponent is at the rating where they'll very, very clearly see the threats. I'm expecting king d8, maybe king d7 here. The drawback of these moves is it puts the king on the open file for my rook, and then I'll queenside castle with check. And that should be very, very nice. So I'm not sure like what the best move is for black. Best move might be rook b8. Allow this and then run this way. But it's not pretty. We do see king d8. I mean, if I want to, I could start with knight g5. But I think castling... It's kind of ironic that I'm getting my king safe and exploiting black's king. Always feels good to castle with check. And here there's a pretty devastating move for black, pawn e6. A very feel-good move for me. So I'm attacking the pinned bishop. I'm also unleashing the attack against c7. But I might as well start with taking the bishop with check. And it's about to be an all-you-can-eat buffet in black's territory. Now I can take the pawn with check. And yeah, the only legal move was king f8, and I was ready to take the rook. So pretty quick game. And we see an example of, like, even when queens are traded early, it can still be possible to attack. And the attack worked out partly because I was controlling more space, had more development, and black just didn't get the pieces to good squares in time to like defend. And I think one of the big positional mistakes was playing f5, because it really just didn't have a purpose and weakened the position a little bit too much. Maybe if black started with 97, this would be a bit more practical, preparing knight g6. Eventually the bishop could develop here and castle, and then it would be a bigger fight. So I've broken 900. Let's do one more. Feeling good. Playing Kim Day, rated 965. And I'm sticking with classical openings. You see bishop to c4, the bishop's opening. With knight f6, I'm already preventing these shenanigans, so it doesn't make sense for white to develop the queen. And let's play a two knights defense. This does give white the option of playing a fried liver. Okay, so we do have what could be the beginning of a fried liver. Now the best move here, of course, I have to address the fact that my pawn's attacked. So the best move is d5. I believe, I know that there's another move, bishop to c5. This is called the Traxler, but not going to play it in this game. And in this position, the pawn takes, and a lot of players go wrong here in recapturing d5. And the reason why taking on d5 is a mistake is it allows this very nice trick, knight takes f7, king takes f7, and then queen f3, which I believe I showed in a previous episode. So I'm going to play the main line here, knight to a5. And we're actually following the game between Alireza Firouzja and Fabiano Caruana from the Sinquefield Cup a couple of days ago. But this is a very common line at amateur level, but also at grandmaster level. And it can be a very sharp opening, because I lost a pawn, and I'm not necessarily winning it back. So I'm in check here. Best move is to play c6. And in some sense, this is a gambit. I'm going to take on c6, attacking the bishop. Now, the nice thing about this for black is I have initiative. The bishop's attacked. It's probably going to have to move. And then I can continue by kicking the knight. And for the next several moves, there will hopefully be some nice initiative for black. Now, I don't actually remember the theory here. I know bishop d3 is like one of the most topical moves at high level. So, I mean, so far, this is not at all a beginner level game from either of us. Like I think we're still following Grandmaster level theory. One of the points of bishop d3 is white can respond with knight e4 rather than having to go back to f3 or h3. And in this position, I'll say that I'm on my own. Like I don't remember any specific prep, but I can think about this logically. Is I'm down a pawn. If I trade, that's one line to consider, but I think that just favors white because I clarify the position. And one of the drawbacks for white is this bishop on d3 is in the way of the queenside development. It blocks a pawn, which in turn blocks white's for a bishop. So I think I'm happy here to play knight to d5. And even though this moves the same piece twice, I am perhaps violating some opening principle. I do have the idea of playing knight f4 to attack the bishop. On top of that, I do have ideas also of playing f5 to harass the knight. But I have to be careful playing f5 too soon because it would allow queen h5 check. So here, I guess I have to choose. Do I want to play knight f4 immediately or complete development? If I play knight f4 immediately, there's bishop e2. I think I'd rather develop and still got to focus on opening principles, like get the king safe. And then as we approach the middle game, I'll decide whether to go for knight f4 or go for f5 to like aggressive moves to attack white. Knight c3 does hit my knight, but I'm going to leave the tension and just castle. I really wouldn't mind if we trade and then I get the two pawns in the center. And with the king castled, now f5 seems a lot more feasible. Then don't have to worry about queen h5 check. And yeah, f5 would probably force the knight back to g3. Okay, b3. And we could still be following theory. Probably have to check after the game if this is still some theoretical line. So I'm debating here between f5 and knight to f4. And both moves do look pleasant. If I play f5, we can imagine knight g3. And then I have some choices, like I could go for e4. I could follow through with knight f4. I think the lines are very similar. I'm going to start with f5 because I think it's a move that I'll play eventually. And I'm not sure if I want to keep the knight here or if I want to commit it to f4. So after knight g3, I do have a decision to make. Yeah, I could also consider taking the knight. And then after take, play a move like e4. I'm imagining bishop c4, then white gets triple pawns. So let's calculate takes, e4, probably bishop e2. Not 100% sure. This is definitely one of the more challenging games I've played so far in this series. I'm going to try and manage my time here, not get too low on time. So I'm looking at knight f4, bishop e2. It's like a question, how do I get my other minor pieces into play? I play e4, maybe something like e4, bishop e2, and then bishop f6. Looks reasonable. Yeah, let's start with e4. Because I like the prospect of gaining space and opening the diagonal for my bishop. Okay, so we see bishop c4, which I'm very happy about because now I can trade off my knight, which was very grim on the rim. And now I can take and triple white's pawns. And I'll still be down a pawn. Like, I have 6 pawns, white has 7 pawns still. But white has triple pawns on the c-file, so like these pawns don't really count towards being worth 3 pawns. And I also have the bishop pair. So I think from here I just want to get the bishops to good squares. Let's start with bishop to e6. I mean, if I wanted to, I could have traded. But if white wants to trade, then I'll be happy to get the d-file. And in the meantime, I'm attacking the pawn on c4. So we might see a move like queen to e2. Or a move like bishop e2, but yeah, the problem with this is it leaves the pawn hanging, and the bishop's not going to have much of a life being blocked by the c-pawn. And I'm attacking the rook. So I imagine we'll see either rook e1, maybe queen takes e8. I am falling below 4 minutes. White's playing aggressively, attacking the pawn on f5. So there's a few ways to address this. I mean, queen d5 or queen a5 would defend. Oh, but also, do I just take the rook immediately? I almost forgot I was attacking the rook. Yeah, I'm going to take the rook. Even though this might allow like the pawn to come here and white to try and orchestrate a kingside attack, I should have enough ways to defend. And rather than directly defending the pawn, I'm going to play queen e8, which just offers the queen trade. And it doesn't give white any time to take the pawn. Of course, the queen can't take because the rook defends. If knight takes, then I win the queen. And if takes, I'll take with this rook, and the pawn will stay defended pretty much every line. So white's playing very wisely, avoiding the queen trade, which usually makes sense when you're down material. You want to keep pieces on the board. Also, when you're up on time, you want to keep pieces on the board, trying to have a longer game. So I'm playing queen g6 to align with the king, maybe someday getting in f4 and f3. I also defended the pawn, so queen is not able to take on c6. I think the plan going forward from here is to try and advance on the king side. Now, I don't want to play f4 too quickly because it allows knight takes e4. But something like rook a e8, just getting the rook behind the pawn. Okay, white unleashed the diagonal, but I'm okay with that. I'm going to play bishop d6. Really just trying to optimize the pieces. Now I'm very much ready to play pawn f4. Okay, white attacking the g-pawn. If I play f4, I don't want things to get too messy. So there's a few moves here. I could offer the bishop trade. I think I'd much rather just defend with the rook. My bishop is useful in preventing knight f4. Also notice how all my major pieces are in light squares, so the bishop can't physically exploit them or physically attack them. A downside of having a bishop only move on the same color square. And now with knight coming back, I'm ready to play pawn f4. Rook e8 over defended the e-pawn. And now I think white is in a lot of trouble. If knight goes back to h5, I would have played f3. In this case, I'm happy to take. I could also play pawn f3 here. Do I want to play pawn f3 first? It would threaten checkmate. Yeah, I think I do. I was about to just take the knight, but sometimes when you see a good move, you want to look for the best move. In this case, I'm threatening checkmate. I'm also threatening the queen. So winning the queen or checkmating is much more valuable than just winning the knight. And even if white plays this like fancy looking knight f6 check, I would take it. F pawn's still supported. Mate is still threatened. Okay, so now I just have to move quickly enough not to lose on time. But this is still plenty of time, especially being up a lot of material. Although if I take the knight, I do allow white to take. So do I want to keep my rook on the board? Nah, let's simplify. I'll take. Allowing white to take, but then the king will be a bit more exposed. And I'm going to employ the rook lift here. Rook lift is simply when you move up and then over. Really just trying to generate some checkmating idea. But if I can get the rook here and queen here, there's going to be some, hopefully, eventual checkmating ideas. And there's not really much the bishop can do to help defend. I mean, maybe white can try king h1, rook g1. Let's start with queen f4. Just want to take on f3. I think maybe the point of this move is, yeah, the king wants to run this way. The problem for white is I'm cutting off the king. And queen h1 checkmate, I believe, is unstoppable. I'm not pre-moving it because there is bishop e5. But yeah, checkmate is coming very soon. I mean, this was a very good game. I think this was one of the most challenging games for me in the speedrun. I don't think there's been a game so far in the series where I've gotten this low on time. And it seemed like my opponent either like knew the opening pretty well or was able to figure out the opening quite well. But still managed to prevail. And I think, I mean, without checking with the engine, I think like one of the key mistakes was bishop c4 allowing this transformation where white got triple pawns. Like if bishop e2, I wasn't so sure how to proceed. Like I really want to prepare f4, but then e4 would hang. White's ready to maybe at some point play d3. So if we go back, checking, I don't know if there's an opening book here. Okay, I'm checking with the engine, so yeah, white was slightly better out of the opening. Okay, we do have the eval bar. But it was very close to equal. And yeah, the engine does not like this bishop c4 move. As we see I mean, we definitely saw the downside of the triple pawns. And then here probably white should play queen e2. Engine's actually saying bishop f4, and just stay more in the center. But anyway, I think this was a nice example of one of the main lines in the two knights defense. And I should note that for those that are maybe new to this opening, you should not play knight takes d5 as black. Even though it's kind of playable, it runs into this trick for white. And yeah, the best move is king e6, and black is under serious pressure with knight c3. So I did not want to be entering that in this game. So anyway, I think this is a good point to wrap things up. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you learned a thing or two, and stay tuned for more. See you soon.